you're a pretty polarizing figure, man. Like there are people that absolutely love you, and then there are people that are completely against everything that you stand for. What do you think your most controversial take is?
Probably Christianity, no doubt. That's an easy one.
What is that? So like as a whole, like what does that look like? Because I know I saw a little bit of your I guess conversation with Wesley Huff and a couple others and stuff like that. Like there's so many people that are, like I said, so against you, and then so many people that are completely like wholeheartedly believe in everything that you do.
Yeah. It's totally like a you love me or hate me kind of thing, which is interesting. Well, man, coming out of Christianity myself, my whole life, I deeply understand the cognitive dissonance that a Christian lives with. And when I look back at a certain period of my Christian life, so probably 16-ish years old to about 24, 23, when I finally left Christianity, that period was marked with a lot of internal conflict and suffering and feeling ungrounded in my faith and all these feelings that nobody wants to live with. And so the reason that I talk about Christianity so much is because it's near and dear to my heart, obviously. I think you kind of have to live your path as it's laid out for you. And my path has been I'm a third generation pastor's son. I grew up in evangelical church and I was the preacher's boy, the golden boy. I loved it. I loved church. I wanted to be a pastor and I wanted to set the world on fire for Jesus, right? And so in a very interesting way, I'm actually still doing that, which is cool. But I have great compassion and empathy for Christians who are in that position of understanding there's just so many things here that I can't reconcile, that don't add up. But it's like I feel like I have to give up Jesus and God and all the good stuff in this book in order to question the bad stuff in this book. And so I'm really trying to help Christians realize, no, you don't have to do that. Obviously, I still read and study the Bible and teach from the Bible all the time. I'm working on my second degree in the Bible. Like, for crying out loud, you don't need to throw out the baby with the bathwater. But I understand why Christians think you do, because they've been so indoctrinated and propagandized by religion to believe that if you don't read this book as a literal, infallible, handwritten letter from God, then you are evil and going to hell, and you can't have it both ways. And so I understand how tricky those paradigms can be, but I'm trying to reach the Christian. I'm not trying to reach the Christian who's like doubled down, dogmatic fundamentalist, not interested in questioning. I don't care to reach those people. I'm not trying to poke that bear. I'm trying to reach the people that are where I was for a long period of my Christian life of, look, I believe in a God of unconditional love, whose heart is to save everybody, and whose love is far, far surpasses what any human could comprehend. And so I just cannot reconcile this idea of eternal conscious torment, that the idea that God would take a finite being who is literally, like, epistemically not capable of producing enough sin to warrant eternal conscious torment. It isn't a possible thing that can happen. A finite being cannot possibly deserve eternal conscious torment. And yet we say that God does that anyways. And all of these beliefs that Christians espouse about God in the afterlife, to me, are absolute denigrations of God and disrespectful to the Creator to even posit that God would have a heart to do such a thing. Not only is it completely absurd logically on its face, but it's also morally indefensible. It's metaphysically indefensible. So I want to reach those people who have that kind of cognitive dissonance, where they know there's got to be a deeper truth here that my religion isn't telling me, but I don't know where to go look for it. And my religion tells me everywhere I go to look is evil and New Age and Gnostic and stuff. So I'm trying to bridge that gap a little bit. And I guess you could say I'm trying to bridge the gap between Christianity and the New Age. I sort of see, Jesus said, strive to enter through the narrow way, right? And I see what I'm trying to teach as kind of the narrow path between Christian fundamentalism on this side and New Age spiritualism on this side. I think both camps need Jesus, funny enough. I think the Christian side over here is preaching and teaching and believing in a completely fictionalized kind of Greek or Greco-Roman pagan Hellenistic version of Jesus that absolutely never existed. That is a made-up character that the Greco-Roman Catholic Church was trying to model after the Greco-Roman mythology. There's all kinds of demigods in the Greek tradition that come down from heaven and stuff. And so Bart Ehrman and other scholars have talked a lot about this idea of how Jesus, Yeshua, the man, became God in this religion. And so many of the doctrines like the Trinity and the virgin birth are just like conclusions in search of an argument, trying to show, you know, he really was God. See, because he was born of a virgin. And there's the Trinity, so he has to be God. It's all these conclusions searching for arguments to validate or justify them. And so I want to help people see that, especially Christians who they want to follow Jesus, they want to follow the way of Jesus, but it's been so convoluted by religion that they don't really know how to make sense out of it. I want to help them. And then on the other side of the fence, I want to help the New Age movement, which I've been involved in, I guess, for the better part of 10 years now. And I've never liked that term, but you know, people would classically say, oh, Aaron, you're basically a New Age spiritual teacher, right? Because you teach alternative spiritual ideas outside of religion. Okay, cool, whatever. But the New Age movement to me is sorely lacking in some certain categories. And I would say true righteous embodiment of spiritual virtue being number one. As you probably know, James, like the New Age movement, although it's very well meaning, like, which is kind of different than Christianity, right? I don't think Christianity is all that well meaning at the top level of the religion, but I think New Age is, and people in the New Age are, but a lot of them have been totally burnt out, flamed out by religion. They want nothing to do with dogma. And so they run to the other side of the fence or the other polarity, and it ends up being this kind of spiritual bypassing cult that it's all about claiming things you haven't earned yet, which I think is the big difference between Jesus's teachings, that Jesus taught us a path of how to emulate him and to follow him and to bring his kingdom, bring the kingdom of heaven to earth. That's a daily dying to yourself. That's a daily humility test that requires true repentance and forgiving everybody. And although the New Age movement, I think, emphasizes a lot of great stuff, most specifically like law of attraction and manifestation, I think that's great. And Jesus absolutely taught those things. But when you make those things the pillars of a spiritual philosophy, I think you lose your grounding a bit. And so I'm trying to bring Jesus also to the New Age and say, hey guys, I know we all love Jesus, right? We should really like pay attention to what he said, because he didn't emphasize create your reality and all this stuff. He really emphasized, I don't know who you are. And if you come to me at the end of your life and ask to enter my kingdom, I'll look at you and say, did you feed the poor? Did you love the needy? Did you love your neighbor as yourself? And if you can't say, yes, I did, Lord, I'll say, well, then I don't know who you are. Bye-bye. It's like, that's kind of a scathing rebuke from the master that I think we should pay attention to, that I don't think Christians pay any attention to that message at all. I think they say, oh, that's nonsense. That's the old covenant. We're now under the new covenant of confess and believe. But the New Age kind of does the same thing. They don't really pay attention to the moral philosophies of Jesus that say living in this universe is all about behaving, being, living in alignment with God's laws. And there are great, great consequences to violating God's laws. And so here's a simple philosophy, which I kind of summarize as the law of one, which is love God with all your heart. And you express that love of God by loving your neighbor as yourself. In other words, you cannot say you love God if you hate or judge your neighbor, because as Jesus said, I am in all of those people that you hate and judge. And so when you did it to them, you did it to me. And I think that's a very relevant message today, again, for both the Christian and the New Age movements.
Man, we're starting off strong. It is very true. It is very true. I mean, I think the reason I wanted to start from that position of you being a controversial figure is because so many people need to be in a camp. They need identity, and identity lives in a certain philosophy, a way of being, and leaning on those things to give you some kind of certainty within yourself. And I'm curious if you see this, because you're so deeply entrenched in it nowadays, is I feel like on social media, even more so than anything, Christianity has become quite popular in a way. Like it's almost like it's cool to become Christian now. Do you notice that? Are you seeing that too?
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
Why do you think that is? Like, where do you think that's coming from? Because it like Wes Huff, as an example, like when you had your conversation with him, he's been on some of the biggest podcasts in the world. Like, why do you think it's getting so much attention that it is?
Yeah, this is a great question, man. So as the collective consciousness moves through decade by decade, we know that there's these polarity swings, right? Where we've seen it politically, we've seen it militarily, we see it religiously. For a while, there'll be a pendulum swing to one side, and we've been on the kind of secular humanist side, atheists kind of taking over. For a while, you had the Sam Harrises, the Richard Dawkins, the whoever else, these kind of atheist apologists that are debating Christians and just like nuking them in these debates. And so everyone's like, well, clearly Christianity is done for. It's toast. It's a relic of the past. And now atheism's the new way. Because look at all these, atheist philosophers who are destroying the debate scene. And then, the Christians I think they doubled back and said, we got to get better arguments. And so whether it's the Eastern Orthodox or the Catholics, the Protestants, they started, it seems like a deep and devout studying of philosophy, and really mostly Greek philosophy, ironically enough, Aristotle, Plato, and so forth. They started formulating better arguments for God. One idea I'm thinking of is like the transcendental argument. I'm not sure if you've heard that before, but the way it essentially goes is there's all these things we can name that are considered transcendental. So the laws of logic, mathematics, identity, time, memory, all kinds of things that everyone would say these are clearly real phenomenon, things that really exist independent of my mind. And yet I can't weigh it on a scale. I can't measure it in any objective way. And so the secular humanist, or the materialist rather, is in kind of a predicament of how do I justify where these come from if there is absolutely no source whatever outside of the physical realm? And these things are not physical, yet they clearly exist. Even mathematics, right? If mathematics are concepts, not hard blocks of matter or something. You can't see 2 + 2 = 4 anywhere. It's like an idea. It's a conceptual idea. And humans did not invent math. We discovered math, right? And now we can use the laws of mathematics to explain basically anything in the realm of physics. And so you say, okay, so if those ideas did not originate from a human mind, but the human mind discovered these pre-existing ideas, and again, they're concepts, not hard matter or things we can see objectively, then there must be a mind in which those concepts exist. So this is kind of the transcendental argument. And now the Christians come back to the atheists, and now we're seeing a very much different picture in the debate scene of, you see a lot of these Christian philosopher debaters just destroying atheists now in debates, and they can't really grapple with some of these arguments. And so myself and some of my friends, Cam Waters and James Benefico and others, we're trying to sort of enter this scene. We're not doing it yet, but we're preparing to do it, to sort of bridge the gap and say, whether it's Catholics, Eastern Orthodox, or Protestants, they all claim to have the original Christian tradition. The Catholic Church essentially, right, is the origin of it. And what we're here to say is, not only is the Catholic Church not the first Christian church tradition, it's not even the second one, but at best the third one. Because the very first church was actually established by Jesus himself, inarguable. You cannot debate this fact. We have multiple secular sources. We have multiple patristic sources, all converging to the same exact conclusion. Gospel of Thomas, Epiphanius, I believe Josephus mentions James. A number of sources mention that Jesus appointed his brother, James the Just, to be his successor, is the word. And that word successor is huge, because in all these secular and religious sources that say Jesus appointed James his successor, implies Jesus was the founder, right? Obviously, Jesus was the founder of a church, which St. Jerome speaks of by name in the 4th century, called the Holy Poor, or the poor ones, the Church of the Poor. And so the word is ebionim, the poor ones in Hebrew. And if you read the Dead Sea Scrolls, scholars who study, Dead Sea Scroll scholars study, they say there really is no sectarian designation we can find in the Dead Sea Scrolls, meaning the word Essenes doesn't appear in the Dead Sea Scrolls, which is very curious. It's like, hey, everyone says that these scrolls were written by the Essenes. Why don't we see the word Essene all over them? Interesting. Well, when scholars dig deeper and they start looking for sectarian designations of, like, what did this group call themselves? And I've studied a number, at least half a dozen Dead Sea Scroll scholars who've come to this same conclusion. They say the only designation you can really give is the poor, or the poor ones. This is a name over and over again. They call themselves the congregation of the poor ones. And you say, how do they describe the way that they live and their liturgical structure? And this is where the work of Dr. James Tabor and some others has been really paramount, because it shows that this Dead Sea Scroll group, and I still can't get over this, man, how explosive this is. And we tried to pull this out in our debate with Wes Huff, right? The name the poor ones, they describe their liturgical structure and living practices. They were communalistic. They lived in voluntary poverty, or communalistic living. So a big group of people living together and sharing all their possessions in common. And in their sort of liturgical document called the Community Rule, it lays this out in explicit detail. And it's almost word for word with the book of Acts in some points that says, when anyone joins this congregation of the poor ones, the Ebionim, they must bring all their possessions and share their possessions with everyone so that nobody has anything of their own. And every need is met and da 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 da. When you read Acts chapter 2, which is supposed to be right after Jesus died and crucified and resurrected, and then his apostles carry on his church, and they're meeting in Antioch, I believe, and it describes exactly the same group. They're voluntary poverty, communalistic living. They practice baptism for repentance and the remission of sins. So in other words, they don't believe confess Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior. They believe you have to be baptized in his name and then repent from your sins and you'll be forgiven. They are rejecting the temple, all kinds of, there's so many parallels. There's like a dozen we pull out that Dr. Tabor pulls out. And the craziest thing is in the New Testament, Jesus, in multiple occasions, when he tries to recruit people who he thinks might make a good disciple, he has this classic phrase he says, where he says, if you want to be my disciple, go sell all you possess to the poor and then come follow me. And for a long time, scholars have just assumed that that means go find poor people out in the street and just give them whatever you possess, and then come find me and then follow me. But if the poor, as Jerome cites it, if the poor is Ebionim, the Hebrew name, is the name of the church that Jesus founded, the group, the congregation of the poor, then what he's saying is sell all you possess to my community, meaning come join us, right? If you want to join my group, you have to sell all you possess to the Ebionim, give up all your possessions, and then you can follow me. So he's trying to tell people, look, I know you want to be my disciple, you like my teachings and stuff, but if you want to really be my disciple, here's how it has to work. Put your money where your mouth is. Sell all you possess to our community, do what we do, live in communalistic living, and then I'll know you really mean this. And what a genius idea that is, isn't it? What a genius, what's the term I'm looking for? Like when you're trying to vet people, who really means business and who doesn't, right? Mm-hmm. Anyone can just say, Jesus, let me be your disciple, man, you're awesome. And everybody wants to be holy by association.
Right.
But Jesus is like, oh, I get people all day long asking me to be my disciple. But here's my real litmus test. If you want to be my disciple, give up everything to my group and come and live with us. And then I'll really know you mean business. And it says the rich man walked away sad. He wasn't able to do this, right? This is how Jesus knew someone was really centered in their heart, really wanting to follow him. So this is what we tried to pull out in the debate, that we have this lost Christian history of the Jerusalem Nazarene church of James the Just, the brother of Jesus, okay? The blood brother of Jesus was appointed by Jesus, who said, you're going to take over my church and lead it after I'm gone. And then James led the church for about 30 years until his death in 64. And then the temple's destroyed in 70 AD, and all the Jews scatter all over the diaspora. But we have a specific record, brother, which is amazing, from a man named Hedgesippus, who was a Hebrew historian of the Nazarenes. And he wrote a 5-volume set of Nazarene church history. Okay, 5 volumes. That means this was an enormous document, historical document. And Hedgesippus was transcribing everything that took place in the Nazarene church of Jesus from 70 AD essentially, 33 AD when James took over, all the way through 180 when he was writing. So into the late 2nd century, we have the Jesus church of his actual bloodline running this church. And then after James is killed, Simeon is appointed by James as James's successor. And Simeon was either the half-brother or the cousin of Jesus. So we have this tradition that was literally, bro, I mean, think about this. Preserving the bloodline of Jesus at the hierarchical structure of their church for almost 200 years. And it's been erased. No one cares. Oh, the Catholics were the first church. And it's like, no, they weren't even close to the first church. They came centuries after the first church. And in fact, the Gnostics were the real second Christian tradition after the Nazarene Jewish Christians were. And I don't know if you know much about the Gnostics, but they had a massive uprising that many scholars say the Gnostics would have outnumbered the Orthodox Christians for quite a long time because it was a populist movement. And they were rejecting the Old Testament, the Hebrew God, Yahweh is a devil, pretending to be God and stuff. And it was only because the Orthodox Church had the might of the Roman Empire behind them that they eventually outlasted the Gnostics and were able to flip the script and say, okay, now you guys are the heretics and we're the Orthodox. And so the Catholic Church made up a fake tradition where they say that our church was founded by Paul and Peter. And you can talk to any Catholic apologist and they'll say, oh yeah, we're the real church because we have the real apostolic tradition. Our popes, if you go back from our pope tradition all the way back, it traces back to Peter himself. Peter was the first pope of the Roman Church, and then Peter appointed another pope, and then he appointed another pope, and today we have the successive lineage of the apostles. It's an absolute laughable joke, dude. And people don't understand this. All of Paul's writings, he never mentions founding a church at Rome, but the key ingredient here is that Paul wrote a letter to the Romans, right? Right there, case closed. You don't get an apostolic tradition through Paul when he's writing to a church in Rome that already exists by 40, 50 AD that he's writing to. He's trying to convince these people of his theology. And Romans is kind of classically known as Paul's greatest work by far. It's an extremely long book. And he's just kind of being an apologist for his own theology, trying to convert these people. Come follow my teachings. And he's asking them if he can go visit them and stuff. So there's already a church that Paul did not establish. And then you say, okay, maybe Peter established it. Okay, zero record Peter ever went to Rome. Hegesippus, Eusebius, and Epiphanius all say that the disciples fled to Pella at the destruction of the temple. They went east to the Transjordan, and that's where the Nazarene Ebionites lived for the next 400 years. So we have a perfect lineage tracing through Hegesippus's 5-volume church history where the Nazarenes went. They did not go to Rome. There is no record at all that Peter ever went to Rome in his life. And then you look at what are our earliest references of the Roman Catholic Church? And it would be St. John Chrysostom, I think, or Justin Martyr. Writing in the early 2nd century, they mention the Roman Church, zero mention of Paul, zero mention of Peter ever starting it. I think you only have one church father, one or two church fathers, I think Irenaeus being one, who says in like the late 2nd or 3rd century, oh yeah, this church, Peter founded it at some point. So we just have a church father speculating that he thinks or he heard that Peter started this church. That's the best evidence that the Catholics have, that they have the true apostolic tradition. And so it's like, bro, juxtapose that, paltry, like embarrassing amount of evidence compared to the Jewish Christian Nazarene tradition, where we have secular sources, Pliny, Josephus, all attesting to this. We've got tons of patristics attesting to this. We have original Hebrew Gospels, like the Hebrew Gospel of Matthew and Thomas attesting to these things, that the first church was led by James the Just, not Peter. And that's what succeeded after Jesus for a few hundred years almost. And why do we not care? Why have we denigrated this tradition? Oh, because the Catholic Church fathers, starting around the 2nd or 3rd century, they start condemning the Nazarene sect in Pella as heretics. Oops. They began to call the very sect that Jesus was from, the Nazarene sect. And Eusebius himself even says in Proof of Gospel, Jesus founded the sect of the Nazarenes. All of these records show us that the church fathers called the Nazarenes heretics because they didn't believe Jesus was God. They believed he was the Messiah, as the Hebrew Bible had always said, right? There's no prophecy in the Old Testament saying that the Messiah will be literally God or the second person of the Trinity or any of that, right? It's all made up Gentile Catholic nonsense. And it took over the Christian religion. And now everyone's following this kind of pagan Christianity of Catholicism, which I could argue all day has absolutely zero connection to the real historical Yeshua or any of his disciples. So we're trying to get out into this kind of debate scene right now because it's so primed and ready for this conversation. Because you've got all these Christian traditions, the Ortho bros, the Catholic bros, Wes Huff for the Protestants, and they're all debating each other. We've got the real tradition. No, we do. No, we do. And Cam and I are ready to come along saying, actually, all your traditions are fake and gay. And the real tradition is the Nazarene Church of the Jewish Christians. Yeah. And the implications of that are just so enormous to me that it really does take I'll probably have to write like multiple books just to do justice to this subject that I think, man, this is the greatest story never told in history. that the real church of Jesus, that again, Jesus himself started this church. As far as all the records show, that it converges in this direction. And how did that get lost? Like, how could this have possibly happened? And when you study the history of how it happened, it's pretty ugly and pretty messy. You know, you've got the Catholic Church coming along, just sort of deeming themselves the Orthodox Christian religion and burning all the Nazarene texts, burning all the Jewish Christian texts, and labeling them as heretics and saying, you cannot practice Nazarene Christianity in Rome or you'll have all your property seized. So the Nazarenes had to keep fleeing away from the Roman Empire. So they kind of got lost to history, and their story has never been told, at least until now.
Dude, it's coming at such a great time too. It's funny. Two of my closest friends are both named Luke and grew up with a similar position to you, with this fear-based religious conditioning that drove so many of their decisions throughout their life, and they're still dealing with it in some capacity. And it's
Yeah.
I'm curious, like, what you're trying to bridge this gap in such a massive way. What do you feel like the main overall mission is that you're trying to do here?
Yeah, great question, man. It's very simple. The main mission is the Jesus way, of getting that message out of, look, there is an original way that Jesus actually taught that is not contaminated by Catholic theology or Paul's teachings or any outside influences. But we have to be willing to go back to the records we have of what Jesus taught, which, you know, I don't claim to know for sure that the words of the canonical gospels are definitely what Jesus taught. But all we can really do in like scholarship or studying history, this is called textual criticism, right? Or hermeneutics, is we can look for consistencies in the message across time and across multiple authors or writers. And if you have across time and multiple authors the same key themes showing up, it's most likely that that's a legitimate teaching or theme, right? And so we have that with the Gospels in pretty extraordinary fashion, that whether it's the Gospel of Thomas, which is an outside tradition from the canonical Gospels, right? But I think like 40% of the sayings in Thomas are shared with the synoptics. So you got many, many traditions and Gospels of Jesus, and they're all kind of showing more or less the same teachings. And so what are those teachings? What is that message? Well, this is the way that I did this to Wes Huff in our debate, and it's the way that I try to sort of red pill Christians on this idea, is I say, okay, all of Christian theology today, modern Christianity, is sort of predicated on Paul's teaching in Romans 10:9. If you confess with your mouth that Jesus Christ is Lord, and then you believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead, you will be saved. So Paul gives this kind of soteriological formula of here's how you do it. Here's how you don't go to hell when you die. And now Paul doesn't ever talk about hell, and that's another big problem for Christianity. But Christianity says today, you'll go to hell if you do anything except the following: confess Jesus with your mouth, believe he rose from the dead. And so I say, okay, so these are the axioms of the Christian religion. Can you show me where Jesus said that? And a Christian will struggle to their own confusion to find any verse that even so much as hints at such a theology. 99% of the time, they already know they can't find it in the synoptics. So they just run to the Gospel of John, which scholars are in total unanimous consensus on this, that this is a very late Gospels edition. And it's the first of the four Gospels that's really not trying to tell history at all. It's trying to tell theology. It's like theology in narrative form. And it's the first kind of Gentile Christian theological document of here's what we believe about Jesus. And so in John, you have all these sayings of Jesus that are not in the other three that are very similar together. John is very unique and different in every way. The history's off, the chronology's off. Jesus goes around, sort of making these deifying claims all the time. And in the synoptics, the people even call Jesus good. He's like, shut up, don't call me that. It's very, very different kind of Jesus.
Yeah.
And so in the book of John, Jesus says a few times, he who believes in me will not perish, but have life, right? And there's a believe in me theme. And so Wes Huff went to that, and Christians always go to that because they try to extrapolate that what Jesus means when he says, believe in me.
That's something I wanted, because the difficult part with so many of the comparisons, or like you having just deep, really philosophical conversations, is that it's up to interpretation. They can say that. You can say that. You can say whatever you want to say, because it's just your interpretation of text for the most part. So it's so difficult to I don't want to say win an argument or get by, but it's just like people are going to have their position regardless, and especially like you said, the red pill, the ones that are very deep and really solidified in their beliefs, they're going to choose whatever that reinforces their identity or what they were told growing up. So it's like there's almost like, I don't want to say there's no winning, but in a lot of ways, interpretation really clouds a lot of people's judgment in a lot of ways.
Yeah, it's the huge problem in Christianity is when you say that this book is inerrant and infallible, all you have said is my subjective interpretation of this book is infallible and inerrant. It's like you can't have a book that is objectively infallible. Words can't be, and what does that even mean, right? But here's where it gets really problematic for Christians is when they go to the book of John, things get even worse for them in trying to prove these two axioms. Because although Jesus says, believe on me a few times, he never says that that means in any way, shape, or form believing in a certain theological concept about him, about his nature, his ontology, his preexistence. He never says you have to confess me. He says, believe in me. And so you have to somehow try to prove that that's what Jesus meant when he never said any such thing. And so when I look for context of, okay, what did Jesus mean? If he did say these things, if he did say, believe in me, according to John's narrative, what do you think he meant contextually? And the only conclusion you can come to when you read John is Jesus means you better obey me, right? He says, if you love me, keep my commandments, John 14:15. The one who has my commandments and keeps them is the one who loves me, John 14:21. Why do you call me Lord, Lord, and not do what I say? Right there. Why do you confess me as your Lord, Lord, and Savior, but you don't follow my commandments? So you can't say Jesus meant confess me as Lord, Lord, when he literally says, why do you confess me as Lord, Lord, and you don't do what I say? He's totally contradicting the Christian narrative.
Right.
And so
Right.
to me, believing in Jesus means believing in his way, believing in the demonstration of God he showed, believing in the pathway he laid out for us. Follow his teachings, keep his commandments, emulate him, follow him. What else could believe on me possibly mean? It means believe what I'm saying to you, believe the God I'm trying to show you. And so when you don't have the main Christian axioms anywhere in the mouth of Jesus, you've got an enormous problem, a huge red alert style problem that Christians just kind of flippantly ignore and wave away. And then you get into things like the Trinity or whatever. And I'm like, please show me where this is anywhere in the New Testament. And famously, 1 John 5:7, which says Father, Son, and Holy Spirit, it's the only verse in the New Testament that says that way, is a known interpolation. All of our earliest documents of 1 John don't have 1 John 5:7. And then in the late second or I think late third century, we get the first copy that some scribe added in this Trinity verse, because late third century is when the Trinity is getting developed, right? So they're going back and just putting lies into the Bible. And you see these kinds of interpolations all over the place, which we were arguing with Wes a little bit in that debate. We're like, guys, I'm sorry. Like, I understand you think these are historical documents, and I mean no disrespect, but you cannot expect a thinking person to accept that claim on its face when the Bible is chock full of known interpolations that are proven and inarguable. And even Wes would agree that 1 John 5:7, known interpolation. Long ending of Mark, known interpolation. These are not original to the Bible, and yet they're in the Bible today that Christians read and think are legitimate scripture. So there's all kinds of problems you have to solve. And I mean, we've barely even scratched the surface of them, but these are just a few of the biggest ones, I think, that, again, I'm only talking about this to help questioning Christians wake up and find some good answers for these questions, not so they can throw Jesus and the Bible in the dumpster. Absolutely not. Just the opposite. I want to redeem this book. I want to redeem Yeshua and show people who this man really was, where he came from, the Essene Nazarene tradition, what his way really was. Love God with all your heart, love your neighbor as yourself. If you do this, you fulfill the whole law. True Christianity, true religion should be simple and childlike in its application. You shouldn't need Wes Huffs and Jay Dyers and all these people to spend hours and hours and hours trying to defend all these crazy theological ideas and make sense out of them and gin up, reasons for why they're legitimate, when Jesus didn't even teach any of that stuff. So I don't care about it. It's like I already have the words of the master himself, right?
Mm-hmm.
If we believe these gospels are what Jesus taught, why do we need anybody else? Why do we need outside influences like Paul and the Catholic Church fathers giving us commentary on what they think Jesus meant? I don't want to read your commentary. I don't care what you think Jesus said. I'm going to read it for myself and come to my own conclusions with the Holy Spirit. And when you do that, I think if you gave the four gospels to a remote desert tribe somewhere who'd never heard of Christianity, never heard of this idea, and you translate it into their language and they read it, they would never in a million years come anywhere near the theology that Christianity espouses today or the original Catholic Church espoused. They would be bizarre and alien to them. They would say, oh, this man clearly came to be the Messiah that was foretold to redeem the Jewish people back to God by showing them the way of repentance and baptism and righteous living. And even after Jesus rises from the dead, he doesn't tell people to believe in his resurrection. It's like it's so laughable in many ways that these ideas have clung on for 2,000 years when they're, in my opinion, from a historical perspective, from a logical perspective, a metaphysical perspective, are totally indefensible in every way.
Man, I knew we'd go deep. This is fun.
We're cooking, bro.
Dude, there's so many people that feel so seen by everything that you just said and all of the work that you do for a reason, right? I mean, there's so many people that grew up with a similar position to you, maybe not even to the level that you grew up with it, but just gave them a position to actually start questioning their beliefs and feel seen in that questioning. This leads me to the new book now. That you have the podcast, you have, like you said, you'll probably have a bunch of different books that come out trying to express all the things that you have to say and all the research that you've put in. But where did the idea of the three beliefs of the ego for the book, where did that even come from?
The Three Beliefs of Ego, which comes out August 12th, my first official book, is kind of a summation of the teachings and the understandings that came to me or through me after I had my spiritual awakening and then sort of plunged back into the dark night of the soul. And so I tell that story in the book. And really, my leaving Christianity played a huge part in that because I kind of woke up from religion, had my first awakening at 23, 24, was like, I can't believe in this version of God anymore. I'm quitting my pastoral job and I'm going to start all over, right? And once I blew up my life, I had to divorce my Christian wife. I lost every Christian friend I had. Even my own parents were kind of like disappointed in me for a while for abandoning the faith and all that. And so I could not have anticipated the existential pressure that put on me psychologically of like, everyone kind of hates me now and thinks I'm a heretic and I have no friends and I'm living in the Bay Area again, working at Google, like all by myself. I really don't have any social life. And so I just slipped into this dark night of the soul. And when you leave a religion or a cult, it's very upending, right, to your framework of reality. And it took me a while to put the pieces back together. So I went through like a closet atheist phase for a few months' time of like, I guess maybe there isn't really a God, and went through that period and then came back to the understanding that maybe there is a creator and then went to Eastern philosophy. And so it all culminated in a kind of spiritual awakening event at 27. And I spent 2 weeks in this kind of Satori state of just this blissful understanding that all is one. There's only God. Absolutely nothing else exists. And so clearly I'm a part of that God, that being. Everyone else is part of that God. We're all just one God, one being, one existence, knowing itself. And it was indescribably beautiful and perfect. And so for 2 weeks, I just somehow stayed locked into that awareness and could not suffer, could not remember what suffering was like. And it gave me two really huge gifts. The first one was this conviction, right? That freedom from suffering, Christ consciousness, if you will, is absolutely a real state of consciousness that is available to the human being. I can't deny that anymore because I experienced it for 2 weeks straight. And then the second gift it gave me was it burnt me out of all my other desires and passions at the time. Fitness modeling, bodybuilding, I could not have cared less about that stuff anymore. And I walked out of that kind of period of my life and devoted all my time to spiritual seeking because I thought the only thing that matters anymore after that 2 week experience, nothing else matters. The only thing that matters is returning to that state of consciousness. And I'll spend the rest of my life trying to do it, even if I have to. Even if I'm 80 years old, before I finally get back to that state of awareness again, it'll all have been worth it because that's how amazing it was. And so that was what threw me into this journey that culminated in this discovery that, I'm like, what is my suffering? Why can't I stop suffering? Those 2 weeks I had in that enlightened state, there was no suffering present. And I literally couldn't remember what suffering felt like, even when I tried to. I was so happy and so free. And now I can't even remember what that's like. And all I know is suffering. How do I get back? And in asking those questions, I started to kind of back engineer my suffering just contemplatively. And I would say, what are the main ingredients of my suffering, right? What feelings, emotions really plague me? And the answer became clear, which is the three emotions of sadness, anger, and fear, which to me are the only three negative emotions we really have or suffer from.
For sure.
There's many variations of sadness and anger and fear. Yeah. But those are the ultimate like three root negative emotions. So the next question was, all right, then why do we have these three distinct negative emotions? They feel different from each other qualitatively, and yet they're all suffering. Like they all suck and are not enjoyable. So why do I feel sad when certain things happen instead of angry or fearful, and vice versa? What causes each emotion to arise? There must be a cause if the emotion's the effect. And it became clear that it's an underlying belief of some sort, right? You feel a certain way because you believe a certain thing. And so then in asking, okay, then what are these three beliefs? What belief is causing the emotion of sadness and anger and fear? That's where this teaching came from, of the three beliefs of ego, that I go into in the book chapter by chapter. And I begin by laying out some of the important foundations, I think. What is the ego, first of all? Like, let's define the ego. And I sort of define the ego as a purely negative function in the mind, which is a bit different than other systems define ego. A lot of systems will attribute to the ego positive functions and negative functions, right? So they say the ego, you need your ego. You can't get rid of your ego because your ego is what makes you empowered. It's how you can believe in yourself and all that. But then they'll also say, and the ego is what makes you disempowered. So it's like, okay, so that's actually a violation of the laws of logic. Metaphysically, that doesn't stack up because the laws of logic say a thing can't be its opposite. So the ego can't be both the source of empowerment and the source of disempowerment. That would violate the law of identity and the law of non-contradiction. A thing can't be what it is and also be the negation of what it is.
Yeah.
Yes. So that's the premise I work with as in the book for the ego. And I get into the next kind of main topic, which I would call the emotional guidance system.
Yeah. You see, I heard this in a conversation with you in the past. Emotional guidance system, I want to say I've heard that phrasing psycho-cybernetics like 1942, around that phase.
Nice.
That was like a massive awakening for me. But when I heard you say ego is it's an activity, it's not an entity, is that right? The right framing?
Yeah, absolutely.
How did you land there?
Well, again, metaphysically, everything is vibration. So everything is just activity. Another way you could sort of look at this is that there are no nouns in the universe. None. There's zero nouns in the universe. There's just verbs. Because even at a subatomic level, even this cup is vibrating particles, right? You never actually find anything that's truly static and existing in a non-changing, impermanent state. Everything in the material world is impermanent and changing. And so when we think of the ego as a noun in the brain, as an entity rather than an activity, then it provokes this belief that there's something real I'm trying to get rid of. And that's a very problematic way to approach your ego, right? And I'm speaking from personal experience. The better way to approach it is I'm just trying to clear up some of my own ignorance, right? I have confusions and misunderstandings about who I am and what reality is. And those confusing misunderstandings we could call the ego, right? Going back to the law of polarity, it states everything must have an opposite to be experienced. And so if God is all love, all truth, all intelligence and perfection, then the ego must be the exact polarity to that in order for God to know itself. There has to be something in the material universe that God uses to be the exact antithetical opposite to itself so that it can look into that opposite contrast and it acts kind of like a mirror for God to go, okay, so if I'm not like that and I'm not like that, now I understand what I am like. So it's like a buffet, right? You know what foods you like also by tasting foods you don't like.
Yep.
So the ego is that for us, for the soul. It's trying to be the mirror for our soul to see its true nature. And so if we think there's anything real or true about the ego, we get lost in its thought system. The ego only appears to be real when we're under its influence, under its thought system. We really feel like I'm just this person. I'm just the stories that have happened to me and so forth. And you'll live under that delusion as long as you want to until you start questioning it. And so the best way to question it is to help people understand the ego is just a mental function. It's not an actual, there's no entity in your mind that thinks these things or is pulling levers. It's not like the Wizard of Oz, right? Where there's some guy behind the curtain. There's nothing behind the curtain except for your own ignorance of what's true. So we're just dispelling ignorance of reality. And so when you see the ego as a verb, an activity, you understand, oh yeah, then I can't, as some people say, I can't have a healthy relationship to the ego, because people will say, you can't get rid of it. You can just have a healthy relationship to it. I say, well, how do you have a healthy relationship with an activity or verb?
Right.
It doesn't really apply, right? You can either engage in the activity or not, but you can't have a friendly or unfriendly relationship with it. So it's kind of a non sequitur, right? These understandings for me really set me free from a lot of stigmas I had incorrect about ego. And that's actually one of 3 definitions I give for the ego in the book. The first one is the ego is the mental activity of identifying with form. I am this, I am that.
Yeah.
The second definition is that the ego is the mind's war against reality or resistance to life. So anytime you feel resistance towards what is happening, I don't like this person, I don't want this to happen, this shouldn't be happening, or that should be happening. Any resistance to life, that's ego. And then the third definition is the classic kind of Advaita definition that ego is the belief in personal agency, personal doership, that I make all my own decisions by myself, isolated from the universe. I'm not being influenced and controlled by any forces. No. I'm the independent lone actor of my experience, and I'm choosing and controlling what happens in my experience. And that is the trickiest of the 3 beliefs of the ego to get behind.
Yeah, no, it is. And we went, because we broke down a little bit of your journey last time, and that 2-week phase was like such an awakening. I remember talking about Eckhart Tolle and him with Oprah, and that being like a big moment for you. Every time I read a new work, I'm reminded how massive our ego plays a role in our lives. And the third one, control, for the new book, The 3 Beliefs, is so massively difficult to I guess not even just unlearn, but like let go of to such an extent that I feel like a lot of high achievers, people that want to believe that they're responsible for everything, because then they're in the position to kind of take the most action. And if something is out of my control, then what do I do about it? Like, we kind of lose our sense of identity if we are not in control in some way. It is so difficult for people. People have to, that has to be the most difficult one, I would say.
For sure. At least it's the most difficult from a contemplative standpoint to philosophically understand why it's not true. It's much easier to understand why lack doesn't exist. And I go into that in detail in the book. It's much easier to understand philosophically why outcomes and attachments cannot fulfill your soul. You know, your soul is immaterial, invisible spirit, and so it can't be satisfied by material form. But then we get to the third belief, and it's like, okay, so how do I philosophically understand that I'm not actually doing anything?
Yeah.
And it almost seems like an impossible understanding, but I've gotten better at refining how I see it and explain it. And I think the best way, at least that I've come up with so far, is here's what we're really saying. Right? You can take people through the body test and say, okay, so you're your body, right? Oh yeah, I'm the body. Okay, great. So how do you beat your heart? How do you do it?
Mm-hmm.
Oh, I have no idea. How do you breathe your lungs? How do you circulate your thyroid? How do you do anything? How do you open and close your hand? How do you have thoughts appear? And can you stop any of these things with effort, right? If you're the doer, then you can simply stop doing anytime you want, right? If you're really the doer. So just go ahead and stop your heartbeat for me. Stop it for like 4 beats and then start it again, because you're the doer. So it should be easy for you. And then they're like, okay, I see what you're saying. So it's not true to say I am the body. It's more true to say the body is part of what I am. The body is an experience, and a very intimate experience of what I am. But I can't say I am the body because I don't know how to do any of it, really. That's what we're also saying for the psychological processes, right? You can say, well, like to your point, James, well, am I not the one who got empowered to succeed in business and started studying Alex Hormozy and all these guys and Gary Vee? And I made my way and I chose to start that business and I forged my own path.
Right.
And I'd say, oh, yes, it seems to be true that you did. But just like you have no idea how to circulate your blood, how do you gain the inspiration to be successful? Where does that come from, right? At what point did you say, I don't desire success at all, but I'd like to desire success. So let me create the desire for success. Okay, I've got it. I'm going to go crush. And then you go start a business, right?
Yeah, yeah.
It never works like that. You just sort of find yourself strangely wanting something other than your life at this moment. There's an impulse in you drawing you forward. It's like, did you do that? Can you stop that impulse? Can you not want to succeed? Can you not want to be happy? No, you can't, because these things are built into your very metaphysical nature, right? You are, because you are an aspect of God, you can't not want happiness. You can't not want success and purpose and so forth. And so we cannot give those qualities to the person. Otherwise, there would just be some people that just didn't want happiness at all, or didn't want to have a purpose at all. And it's like, we've never found nor seen a single person ever exist who legitimately didn't want to be happy and legitimately didn't want to have a purpose or do anything important, right? This is the basic impulse of all sentient beings, is I want to live. I want a purpose to live for. I want to be happy. Even animals share this quality. So we can't give those qualities to a person. So right there, you can understand, okay, that's what it means to say the person isn't in control. It means all of Aaron's desires and impulses actually pre-exist the person Aaron. They're prior to Aaron and coming through Aaron. They're actually using Aaron like a sock puppet, like a hand inside of a sock puppet, right? These desires are like, we could call them divine desires, God's desires, something like that. And they're just coming through the person. So the person is just the activating agent for these pre-existent ideals in God's mind. And so that's what it means to say you're not the doer. It means you don't control your urges and impulses. The person doesn't control what it wants and doesn't want. Mm-hmm. It's just sort of slavishly chasing and running from those things. And so then you say, I'm making all these choices all by myself. It's like, no. You're just not aware of the larger reality in which you exist. It's kind of like saying, I'm the one keeping myself to planet Earth right now. Me, I'm in control of my own gravity. It's like laughable, right? Of course you're not. Gravity is independent of you, the person. So nobody can say that they're in control of gravity. But that's also true of literally everything, which is hard to see at first. But from your own hunger pains, like what time of day you want to eat lunch, that you're not in control of that. And so the way that I help the reader to understand this is through arguments like that in the book. But I also give what I call the requalifying affirmations for all three of these beliefs. And I teach the reader how to best requalify these beliefs, because we're not trying to destroy them or get rid of them or something. We're trying to grow out of them. Yeah, we're trying to evolve out of them. And so let's just requalify this idea, because there's a little bit of truth in everything. It's like, yeah, if you're poor and destitute, there's a sense in which you're lacking right now. That's true. I'll meet you there. But what I'm saying is that lack is not fundamentally real, meaning just because you don't have what you need right now does not mean that what you need is fundamentally lacking from the universe. It's all there. You're just lacking it right now because you don't know how to get it. Mm-hmm. So that's why we say lack doesn't really exist. So we go through these arguments. And the way that I requalify this third belief in control is through a couple of phrases. One of them is, I'm not in control, I am being lived. So I'm being lived. You can also say, I'm not in control, I am in cooperation. And that's a much better word, right? I'm not controlling life. Don't think you're controlling life, or you're inviting some really bad karma to wake you up out of that delusion. I'm not in the control of life. I'm in cooperation with life, right? I'm surfing the wave of life. I'm friends with life. I'm holding hands with life. I'm dancing with life. Life is living me. I'm living life. It's this symbiotic, beautiful relationship. That's the way that I think the universe wants us to interface with it. It's not that the person isn't supposed to have some kind of free agency it can express. Of course it is. We're just saying that to say that you have absolute free will is like a person stuck inside of a maze saying, I have total free will. It's like, no, you definitely don't. You're definitely stuck in a small maze. But within that small maze, you have relative free will. Yeah, you can make choices within the maze, but is that real choice? No, you'd rather just not be in the maze at all. So that's kind of what the human experience is like, right? We're kind of all in this human maze and we can't get out of it while we're in it. And the cosmic forces of and universal laws are governing everything. We have no say over those things. So all we can do is learn them and obey them. So like let's start getting rid of this idea that I'm in control. It's so arrogant and ignorant of what's really true. There's a better way of seeing life. And it's to me, it's really through the famous ancient Eastern practice of surrender and devotion to God. So the second affirmation I give for requalifying this belief is two powers do not exist. I am resting in one power. And I think that's probably the more potent of the two, in my opinion, because you have to start paying attention to what your beliefs and statements are implying about what you really believe, right? So if I really think that I, the person, am exclusively in control of life, I'm essentially saying I'm a second God.
Right.
I'm my own power apart from God. I can act apart from God. I can make choices opposite to God's will and do what I want instead of what God wants. And A Course in Miracles does a great job of dispelling this by saying, you believe that there's two separate wills. There's God's will, and then also there's your will. And it shows that and it doesn't say this exactly, but it sort of tries to show us what you call my will is just like a blind person floundering in the mud or something. It's like you just have no idea where you are and you think you're inventing your own will. You're not. There is no other will. There is no other power. God reigns supreme and omnipotent in every corner of the universe, including your body, including your mind. Everything is governed by universal laws. You can't get out of this. So there is no second will, but it's part of God's will, the one will, that you're allowed to come to these awakenings on your own time. God's not trying to force anyone to realize they're not in control. So God's will is to let you explore the universe and have ignorance and be delusional if you want. And that's part of awakening. It's the contrast we talked about that you need to wake up to yourself. But at a certain point, it's inevitable that everyone will wake up from the dream of the ego of being a separate self. And that's also God's will. And so I think this goes back to our Christian conversation, James, that this is one of those things about God's ontology that is deeply misunderstood in Christian religion and all Abrahamic religions, that things in the universe are happening outside of God's will. And it makes God angry and offended, right? It's like, well, to even posit that something could happen outside of God's will, you've already invented a second power in your mind. So you've already committed the ultimate blasphemy by worshiping another God and saying, I'm the second power, or that person's the second, or the devil is the second power. But Christians invent second powers that oppose God all day long and don't realize that that's actually the highest blasphemy.
Yeah, it's such a big contradiction in so many ways. It really is.
Huge.
Yeah, it's like and
But
the
it's
idea
subtle.
it is. All of it is, right? Like even the ego, like those three beliefs in itself are so subtle. It just seems like reality. It's invisible.
Yeah.
And so if it's invisible, then that is life. And until you start questioning those beliefs, you can't really experience life. It's like thought separates you from reality in a way. Like as soon as you name yourself, as soon as you label something, you take away the magic of what it really is. And
yes,
I think too many people, like you said, we're kind of like sleeping through life in such a way that we separate ourselves from true experience. Or even for your experience, like the 2 weeks was like that example of what life looks like when you don't separate yourself and you don't push away from what real truth is. And man, it's really hard to accept because I think we need it. Our ego wants it to be difficult. And because if we don't have problems, what do we do? It's like the idea of the control aspect of things. If you don't have if my personal doership, if my being is not someone that, it's like, who are you without your goals, without your achievement, without the drive? And most people can't really label that. I don't think really most people know. And it's a difficult thing that most people, I think, for the most of their life really never find balance with.
No, I'm 99% of people never really discover who they are, which in the same way that I can say, like, do you know how you beat your heart and all these things? Can you stop beating your heart? You say, no, I can't do it or not do it. I have no real control over it. The body is happening and I'm just kind of experiencing it is really the closer truth or the closer axiom. But we could also say the same thing of awareness and consciousness, right? We could say, can you stop being aware? Just like choose to stop being aware. And if you can't, then right there's no doer. There's no controller here, right? You just fundamentally are awareness itself. You are always aware and you can't stop being aware. Mm-hmm. And so I get into the I am a bit as well in the book, as this is really the true soul or spirit of mankind, in that, again, we talked about how the ego must be, metaphysically, must be a purely negative function. That means there must be a purely positive function as well in the mind, and they're polarities to each other. So we can't say the ego is both the positive and the negative. It's more correct to say the ego is the negative function of the mind, meaning by negative, meaning it only creates contraction, limitation. It is not capable of causing expansion and empowerment. Ego is not capable of love and forgiveness and these kinds of things. But the soul is, and that's all it's capable of. The soul is not capable of judgment and separation. And so we can ask the question to prove this. Would anyone disagree that the human mind is capable of error and ignorance? And I don't think anybody would disagree with that. It's like, absolutely yes. The human mind is definitely capable of ignorance and error. We see that on full display. So then right there, okay, there must be then something in the mind of man that is inherently false and unreal. Because otherwise, you have to argue that truth is causing the ignorance in the mind, that God, reality, is causing delusion in the mind. And that's a logical impossibility. So truth can't be the cause of ignorance. Only falsity and illusion can be the cause of ignorance. And again, this is the basic premise of ACIM. So once we know that, we say, okay, that's what I needed to see to understand why the ego is a purely negative function and why the ego creates all the same problems it tries to solve. Like you said, the ego needs problems to hook us into its thought system over and over, because the ego sort of starts the problem behind your back. You don't see it, but the ego creates a problem and then goes, no, and it gives you this problem. And it's like, don't worry, I can help you. It's really like the classic mugging strategy. If you've heard of, like, in South America, they'll use like women or children on the side of the road and they look helpless and destitute. And they're like, please help. And then when you get out to help them, you get grabbed by a guy in a van and thrown into a van. It's like, that's kind of what the ego does to you, right? It starts a problem, convinces you to give it your power so that I, the ego, will solve this problem for you. And then it just pulls you deeper into its thought system. More entanglements, more identities, more stories, more attachments, more resistance. And so down and down and down the spiral we go. So if we think the ego is also a positive function in any way, then we'll keep giving it this level of trust, right? How did you get into the problem where the ego is whooping your ass? Because you thought it was positive. You thought the ego could help you. You thought the ego could solve a problem. And so you said, okay, yeah, ego, I'll chase that outcome. And when I get it, then I'll truly be happy. And you bought what the ego was selling, right? Well, now we can clear that up and say, no, ego is purely a negative function. It is never to be trusted, and it can never save you from anything. Now what do we do? Well, we say then if I'm not the ego, because I would never create all the problems I want to solve, right? That's insane. I'm not the one who wants to create problems. Then who am I? And I get into the I am principle of you are the I am, which is God. This is a philosophical insight to me, James, that is really important for people to meditate on, because God is this lofty concept we all talk about. And we connect to God in different ways. But if we know that God is really the primordial reality of all things, in God we live and we move and we have our being, then what is that? How can we define that? And I think the Bible has the best definition of Moses at the burning bush in the book of Exodus. I am that I am. When we slice that definition apart and say, what is the ingredients of I am? We say, well, it's a first person in the present tense principle, right? I am. And so God, because God is the I am, that means God is the I was and I will be, because I am is forever, right? Whatever moment you're in, you're always the I am. You always know yourself. as the first person in the present tense. You never know yourself as the second person. I don't say, you are hungry when I'm hungry, right? So that principle, that eternal conscious principle, the way that you know you are the subject of your experience, and you only ever use the word I to refer to yourself. I mean, think about that. You've never used the word I to refer to another person or a third person. You only use it for the first person. You call yourself I. So we all have the same name at the end of the day. We all call ourselves I, and we all know that we exist right now. Even to doubt if you exist presupposes a person that could doubt you exist, right? So you're even proving your existence by doubting it.
Yeah.
So it's like you cannot get out of this equation. You are the first person in the present tense because that's what God is. That principle is God. And that is the soul, the spirit, whatever you want to call it. That is what is back of the ego. That is the awareness that is watching the ego. And under this veil of forgetting, it's falling into the ego's traps and dreams, and it's getting sucked into them. But after getting sucked into so many ego dreams, lifetime by lifetime, the awareness gradually pulls back from the person and goes, I have to be something deeper than the thoughts in my brain and the body, because I don't know how my body works. I don't know how to stop my thoughts. I don't even want to believe half of these thoughts. I can't possibly be these thoughts. And that, to me, is the true definition of spiritual awakening that I give in the book. Is a spiritual awakening is when someone finally comes to that specific conclusion that I have to be something beyond just my mind or my thoughts. I must be something deeper than that. And they don't even have to know what it is yet for it to be a real spiritual awakening. Just the question appearing like authentically, and when it really bothers you that you know you're not the person and you know you're not the voice in your head, it will irritate you and you won't be able to stop thinking about it for a time. And Jesus teaches something exactly about this in the Gospel of Thomas, saying number 2. And I can't remember exactly the wording, but Jesus says something like, blessed is the one who seeks, for after seeking, he says, let the one who seeks not stop seeking until he finds. And when he finds, he will become disturbed. And then after being disturbed, he will marvel. And after marveling, he will then reign over everything. This is Jesus's description of the awakening process, right? We all seek the truth. We want to know, who am I and what is truth? What is God? And Jesus says, don't stop seeking until you find the answer to that question. Because when you find it, here's how you'll know. It will be disturbing. And that was very much my experience after that 2-week enlightenment wore off. I was extremely disturbed because I just had proof given to me that I'm not this voice in my head. And yet I'm thrown back into full identification with it. Even though I know it's not real, I really felt like a person in a straitjacket, brother. I felt like the most insane person on planet Earth, that I'm listening to this voice in my head. A part of me knows it's not real, and I still can't stop believing in it. Like, I am the schizophrenic. I am the psychopath. I am the multiple personality disorder. And it's very disturbing. But after being disturbed long enough, again, there's the rub, there's the contrast. You need it because it allows you to have a new perspective on truth where you can go, oh, now I'm seeing this deeper. I can't stop the voice in my head because I didn't start it. Right. Like, I'm so not the voice in my head. That's why I can't stop it or turn it off. So it stops being something that's disturbing at that point, and it actually becomes good news, right? And then once it becomes good news, you gain what's called like real liberation, where gradually, and this unfolds over a whole human lifetime, it isn't a sudden event, but you gradually, merge into that awareness, that larger awareness of yourself. And you less and less are able to think about yourself as just a person. The person feels a little bit more like a dream character at night, where you understand, this is my avatar that I'm using to interface with the world. It is like an expression of what I am, which is beautiful and divine, but it is absolutely not the sum total of what I am or a limitation on what I am in any way. I'm just like a dream that God's having. And that awareness, I don't think ever stops expanding in your consciousness during your spiritual awakening.
No, it does not. I think it just gets bigger and bigger. It's a constant game of remembrance in such a way. And like you said a bit ago, you can't really denounce your desires, right? You can't stop yourself from wanting something. Just as much
Nope,
as you
can't
can't
do
stop
it.
that the thoughts that come up in your brain. It's like when you're able to recognize that that is not who you are, and you can separate yourself and just change your relationship with that. It really is everything, man. I mean, I remember the first time I read A New Earth, and it was like this out of body experience of like,
Same.
what am I? What is this? And I read it on chapter 3 right now. I'm rereading it for like the millionth time. And I'm just consistently, and every time I read it, I think, man, if I just read a couple pages of this every single day, my suffering that I experience in life would decrease immensely just through the awareness. Because again, you know this, I know this, most people that are interested in any of the work that we do are aware of it, but then they get lost in thought again, right? Like there's never a point where you get away from it. I could talk about this stuff all day, and I know that you can too. Man, okay, let's bring this to a close, man. I have one last question for you. I ask every guest. And it encapsulates so much of what you're doing with the new book too, man. I'm really excited for it. What belief are you currently unlearning?
Well, I love the question, man, because you should always be deconstructing some belief, right? For sure. It's funny to be teaching this and writing this book because I very much feel like a student of it. I don't feel like I'm some master who's mastered all these principles and I'm dispensing them to you from my lofty position or whatever. It's very much like I'm a student of this just like anyone else. I'm on this path right next to you. And I still work on all three of these beliefs every day of my life. But the difference is, like, I tell people reading this book isn't going to like set you free from suffering forever, right? The book is called A Sufferer's Guide to Freedom. So it almost sounds like, oh, you read this book and you'll be free. That's not at all what I'm saying. I'm saying I believe that this book will give you the tools to begin reclaiming your freedom after you're done reading this book. But it's like you didn't create these three beliefs in lack, attachment, and control. You didn't just create them in a few days ago or something. You've been investing your belief in these ideas your entire life. And so you can only imagine how much power and inertia these beliefs have in your consciousness and your psyche. So don't expect these beliefs to just vanish from your experience overnight, but rather, these beliefs, as I teach in the book, nobody ever thinks to themselves, right, James? Like, I'm lacking.
Right.
Like, that just isn't a thought you think. The ego always puts it in a conceptual framework of like, I wish I had more money or whatever.
Yeah.
So there's always a form it attaches lack to. Lack is the essence, form is the object. And so the ego can disguise these three beliefs in infinite ways, right? It can just make infinite thoughts out of your belief in lack. It can make infinite different thoughts out of your attachments. And it can make infinite thoughts out of your belief in control. So if you just try to play thought correction all day, you're just rearranging deck chairs on the Titanic. Ego loves that game. Oh, you beat this thought? I'll just create a new one. It's like playing a video game character that they just keep coming back alive after you kill them, right? Eventually, you're going to wear yourself out. So instead of the thoughts, just ignore the thoughts essentially, and just try to look to where the thought's pointing you. And this is the way we know where the thought is pointing us. It's only thanks to something in us that is non-conceptual, which is our emotions, right? Our emotional guidance system. Your emotions are this barometer of your quality of thinking in every moment. And because, again, ontologically, we are the truth. We are God. There is no other. I, the Lord, am one. Beside me, there is none else. So God creates everything by becoming it. God is the I am principle that infuses all life. Every creature in the universe is knowing itself through this prism of I am. There is no you are in the universe. There's just I am. So because God is knowing itself as that, we have perfect truth embedded within our being. And so when we think in a way that violates the truth of who we are, such as I'm lacking, I'm unworthy of love, I'm limited, I can't do it, whatever. Any limitation of what is true about you, therefore must produce a negative emotion. Your inner being must respond to falsity and clue you in. Hey, you're thinking something right now that is out of alignment with the truth of who you are. That's why it feels negative. And vice versa, when you think about yourself in a way that is congruent with reality, your inner guidance system will give you a positive emotion like joy and peace and love. And so we can always look directly to our emotions. This is the good news to me, man. We don't need to play, debate with our mind all day. You can just look to your own state of being in any moment and say, how do I feel right now? I feel really sad right now. Okay, well, then I know for sure there's a lack belief in the mind. That quick, right? Immediately I cut to the root of it. I don't have to think about it for the next 10 years. I don't have to do all this shadow work to find that childhood memory of where it's stemming from. You can do those things and they can be helpful. I'm not knocking them. But it's like we have this direct line of communication within us. Why aren't we using it? Your emotions already tell you the underlying belief you are giving power to in your mind. And so when you feel sad, you can say, thank you, sadness, for reminding me that I'm believing in lack right now. So come closer to me, sadness, and please tell me, what does my mind think I'm lacking right now? And you can ask specific questions to your emotional guidance system. If it's anger, come closer. Please tell me, what am I attached to right now? What outcome am I attached to here that's causing all this anger? And then if it's fear, please, fear, come closer. Tell me, what am I trying to control in my life? Or in other words, where am I not trusting God in my life? When you ask those questions, you get good answers, right? Good questions get good answers. And your emotions allow you to ask the best possible questions. So not a day goes by, man, that I'm not doing this work within myself all the time, checking in with my state of being and saying, what's the ultimate emotion I'm feeling? Sometimes it's a mixture of sadness and anger or whatever, but I go to the surface level emotion first. What's the most palpable negative emotion? That's how I know that's the most palpable belief operating in my mind. And then I do what I just described. I bring it in close and I ask it to show me what is it that I'm lacking or attached to or controlling. And from there, I give the practice of how to requalify those beliefs using some of the steps in the book. So really those beliefs, although they're still prevalent in my consciousness, they have significantly less influence in my life. They create significantly little to no suffering in my life at this point. Their influence is still there in ways, but very, very subtle ways that me 5 years ago or 10 years ago, oh my goodness, would look at and think like, man, I don't know if I'll ever get to that level of inner freedom. And it would have been hard for me to imagine just how little influence these beliefs have in my psyche today. But I don't think or presuppose that I'll ever get to a place where lack or attachment or control like stops showing up in my mind. I don't think I will. But it's like it just isn't a problem anymore when you really know how to deal with it and you have the right method of approaching these beliefs that doesn't cause spiritual bypassing and other kinds of problems that I really did run into for a long time before understanding these teachings. So I think in a way, they're very much like a spiritual bypassing proof methodology of approaching your beliefs and your negative emotions.
Man, I'm really excited for it to come out. It's coming up real soon because you're right. I mean, for so many people, we avoid our emotions. We don't want to acknowledge them, but they are the direct access to where it's coming from, our beliefs, like what's prompting it to begin with. But if we continue to avoid it, it's going to stick around just like that, those thoughts in our mind, man. We're gonna have to have you on again. It'll be maybe in a couple months, maybe a year from now again. But dude, every
11
time
more months.
Yeah, for real. Every time we chat, man, I appreciate your time immensely. All the links and everything will be in the show notes, man. Thank you for your time.
Thank you so much, brother. It's always a pleasure.